Watch what happens when a defenseman makes superstars disappear without breaking a single rule.
And Lindros remains down on the ice as all the other players come together.
Heads went down. Careers went with them. They didn't call him a goon. They didn't call him a cheap shot. They called him the most feared shoulder in hockey, and the league kept signing off on it until Lindros dropped, until Kariya dropped, until the rulebook dropped too. To understand the defenseman who made superstars cry, you have to go back to a kid from Kitchener, Ontario, born April 1st, 1964, the middle of three hockey-playing brothers. A Leafs fan who idolized Borje Salming. In 1982, he won the Memorial Cup with the Kitchener Rangers, and a few weeks later, he walked into the NHL entry draft as one of the most coveted players on the board. Washington took him 5th overall, and here's the part most people get wrong. Scotty Bowman, the legendary Buffalo coach, had already worked out a deal with the Capitals to make sure his Sabres would get whichever defenseman Washington passed on, Scott Stevens or Phil Housley. Washington took Stevens. Buffalo took Housley 6th. Stevens wasn't the second choice. He was the guy everyone wanted first. Training camp injuries opened a door. At 18 years old, Stevens made the Capitals roster without ever playing a game in the minors. He scored on his first NHL shot. He finished his rookie year with 25 points, 195 penalty minutes, the most of any rookie defenseman in the league, and 3rd place in Calder Trophy voting. His first head coach, Brian Murray, pulled him aside before his first playoff series in 1983 and told him, "Watch what you're doing. Behave yourself. We need you on the ice." Stevens would later admit, "I had a bit of a short fuse when I was younger. Sometimes your strengths are your weaknesses." 8 seasons in Washington. Then came the contract that changed the league. Summer of 1990. As a restricted free agent, Stevens signed a 4-year, $5.145 million offer sheet with the St. Louis Blues. Overnight, he became the highest-paid defenseman in the NHL. More than Ray Bourque. More than Chris Chelios. Washington declined to match and took 5 first-round picks in return, 2 of which would eventually become Sergei Gonchar and Brendan Witt. Economists and agents would later point to that deal as one of the financial pressures that led straight to the 1994-95 NHL lockout. St. Louis didn't even get to keep him. In the summer of 1991, the Blues signed Brendan Shanahan away from New Jersey. Devils GM Lou Lamoriello rejected every compensation package the Blues offered. Curtis Joseph, Rod Brindamore, draft picks, all of it, and demanded one name: Scott Stevens. On September 3rd, 1991, arbitrator Judge Edward Houston sided with Lamoriello and awarded Stevens to the Devils. The hockey world lost its mind. Stevens lost his, too. "I don't think my name should have been involved," he said. "I was so thrilled that we'd be getting Shanahan." He refused to report for 22 days. He finally arrived in New Jersey on September 26, 1991. And then, for 2 full seasons, nothing happened. Under head coach Tom McVie, the Devils were just another team. Stevens was just another star. One of the best defensemen alive, stuck in a system that had no idea what to do with him. That was about to change, because in the summer of 1993, someone walked into that locker room who was going to redefine what the word defenseman means. Before the hits, you need to understand the system that made the hits possible. Lou Lamoriello hired Jacques Lemaire as head coach and brought in Larry Robinson as his assistant. Both men came from the Montreal Canadiens dynasty of the 1970s, and they brought something with them that the NHL had never seen deployed this way: the neutral zone trap. A 1-2-2 formation that turned the middle of the ice into a dead zone. 4 skaters on a wall, nowhere to pass, nowhere to skate, nowhere to go. The trap didn't want Scott Stevens chasing anybody. It wanted him standing at the line, waiting for the moment a superstar looked down at the puck. His job wasn't to defend. It was to make the cost of entering the zone unacceptable. Here is what a Stevens hit actually looked like. Shoulder, never elbow, skates on the ice. He almost never left his feet. Legal by every word of the 1990s rulebook. It wasn't malice, it was timing. Game 2 of the 1995 Stanley Cup Finals. Detroit Red Wings versus New Jersey. Slava Kozlov came through the middle. Stevens caught him in the head. Kozlov went down and didn't get up. Diagnosed with a concussion. Stevens then skated over to Dino Ciccarelli, his old Washington teammate, who was furious about the hit, looked him in the face, and said 2 words: "You're next." The Devils swept Detroit in 4 games, the franchise's first Stanley Cup. But here's the part of the 1994 playoffs nobody talks about. 1 year earlier, in a series against the Boston Bruins, Steven picked up a puck behind his own net and tried to cut around the crease. He glanced over his shoulder at the wrong moment. Brian Smolinski caught him flush. Stevens skated to the bench on instinct, sat down, and the next thing he remembered, he was on the medical table in the dressing room with no idea how he got there. In his own words, years later, that was a scary feeling. He went back out and finished the game. In 1994, nobody called it what it was. Nobody called it anything. Here is the thing about the hits Stevens was about to start delivering. The brain keeps moving after the skull stops. That isn't a metaphor. That is every hit he ever threw. And in 1994 against Boston, that was also Stevens himself. What happens to the brains on both sides of that hit? May 26, 2000, Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. First Union Center, Philadelphia. The Devils had clawed back from a 3-1 series deficit against the Flyers. 7 minutes and 50 seconds into the first period, Eric Lindros came through the neutral zone with the puck. This was only his second game back from a concussion. It was his 6th as a Flyer, his 4th in 5 months. Under any modern protocol, he would not have been on the ice. He crossed the red line with his head down. Scott Stevens didn't chase. He stepped up, shoulder to the chin. Lindros dropped like somebody had cut the power. The arena went silent. Lindros was helped off by teammates and didn't come back. That was his last shift in a Flyers uniform, ever. He sat out the entire 2000-2001 season with post-concussion syndrome and was eventually traded to the New York Rangers. The player they called the next Gretzky was finished in Philadelphia because of one hit. Here is the part that doesn't fit the legend. Stevens was devastated. Head coach Larry Robinson had to console him during the intermission. In a December 2000 interview, when the topic turned to Lindros, Stevens' eyes glistened. He said only, "It's very hard. It's tough." The Devils won Game 7 2-1. They beat Dallas in Game 6 for the second cup in franchise history. Stevens won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. 3 years later, it happened again. June 7th, 2003, Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim. The Devils are trailing the Mighty Ducks 3-1 in the game. 6 minutes and 26 seconds into the second period, Ducks captain Paul Kariya dished the puck to his left and turned toward the middle. He never saw Stevens coming. Shoulder to the face. Kariya lay motionless. His visor was pushed into his forehead. Teammates helped him off. Everyone watching assumed he was done for the series. 11 minutes later, Kariya walked back onto the ice. He took a pass at the top of the circle, wound up, and fired a slap shot past Martin Brodeur, off the floor, on the board. The Arrowhead Pond came apart. Kariya later said he doesn't remember anything about the rest of the series.
What do you remember about the hit?
Nothing.
Anaheim won Game 6. New Jersey came back and won Game 7 3-0. Stevens lifted his 3rd Stanley Cup. Mike Rupp was a rookie on that Devils team. He ended up on the team bus across from Stevens the night of the Kariya hit. Years later, on the That's Hockey Talk podcast, Rupp described it.
We saw the animal of Scott Stevens on the ice. You get on the bus, he has his glasses on, he's reading a book, he's got the little light above him on, and it's like a different human being. It's more creepy, right? Yeah.
Now, here is where the story turns. In 2013, more than 100 former NHL players sued the league. The lawsuit alleged the NHL knew the risks of repeated brain trauma for decades and hid those risks from the players on the ice. The case was consolidated in federal court in Minneapolis under U.S. District Judge Susan Nelson. In 2016, Judge Nelson unsealed a set of internal NHL emails the league had fought hard to keep hidden. One of them was dated September 3rd, 2011, written in the weeks after 3 former NHL enforcers, Derek Bugard, Rick Rippin, and Wade Belak, had all died within 4 months of each other. The email thread was between Commissioner Gary Bettman and Deputy Commissioner Bill Daley. Daley wrote, "Fighting raises the incidence of head injuries and concussions, which raises the incidence of depression onset, which raises the incidence of personal tragedies." Another unsealed email from NHL Senior Vice President of Communications Gary Maher, August 2014. "The NHL has never been in the business of trying to make the game safer at all levels, and we have never tried to sell the fact that this is who we are." This is not the email about Scott Stevens. That email doesn't exist. This is the email where the NHL's own executives privately admitted in writing what the league was publicly denying about brain trauma in hockey, years after the game had already been rewritten around players like him. Eric Lindros talking about what that era cost him. "I hated going through the middle. I had huge fears. Players who would have never spoken or taken liberties in the past, it was happening all the time. Could I still shoot and pass? I could still score, but it wasn't the same game." So if no rule was broken on any of those hits, who's actually accountable? March 25th, 2010. The NHL announced a new rule, Rule 48, the illegal check to the head. The language read, "A lateral or blindside hit to an opponent where the head is targeted and or the principal point of contact is not permitted." Read that sentence again. Every single word describes the hit on Lindros. The rulebook is the receipt. Nobody had to admit anything. They just rewrote the page and moved on. But the league's silence had one last chapter, and it's the one almost nobody remembers. January 7th, 2004, New Jersey versus Pittsburgh. Stevens took a Pavel Kabina slap shot to the head. He skated off. He was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome. He missed the final 44 games of the 2003-04 season. He tried to come back for 2004-05, but the lockout canceled the entire season. On September 6th, 2005, at 41 years old, Scott Stevens retired. He never played another NHL game. The man who ended Eric Lindros and rattled Paul Kariya with brain trauma had his career ended by the exact same injury. Not from a hit, from a puck to the head. The resume is almost unfair to ride out. 3 Stanley Cups, 1995, 2000, 2003, Conn Smythe Trophy in 2000, 1,635 NHL games, the most ever by a defenseman when he retired. A career plus-minus of plus 395, one of the highest ever at the position. 13 NHL All-Star games, Hockey Hall of Fame, Class of 2007, first ballots, and 4 elbowing minors in 22 years. In 2001, Carolina Hurricanes goalie Arturs Urbe accused Stevens of trying to injure his teammates. Stevens' answer? "What kind of respect do I get? Just because I'm a physical player, it's okay to come at me and do what you want? Hey, it's a hockey game. It's not figure skating. I can take a hit and I can give a hit. I don't care who it is. No one gets a free ride out there. I don't get a free ride, and no one gets a free ride from me." He meant it, and he paid it. Greatest or dirtiest is the wrong question. The NHL made sure those were the same answer. Scott Stevens didn't break hockey. He played it perfectly, and that's exactly what broke hockey. And eventually, it broke him too. Drop a comment. Greatest defenseman ever or the dirtiest player the league ever protected? There's no wrong answer. Stevens made sure of that. If this story meant something to you, tap the super thanks button below. It goes a long way toward keeping the lights on here. And before you go, there are more stories like this one waiting on the channel for you. Players who changed the game in ways that the record books never fully explain. Legends the league tried to quietly move past. Careers that ended in ways nobody talks about it anymore. Hit subscribe so the next one lands in your feed the second it drops.